My life was a structure of straight lines and quiet spaces. I was a graphic designer, a man who found comfort in grids, in the predictable harmony of hexadecimal color codes, in the clean, sterile emptiness of a new artboard. My apartment was a physical manifestation of this philosophy. White walls, minimalist furniture, and books stacked with geometric precision. Each day was a replica of the last, a reassuring rhythm of solitude. Coffee at 7, work from 9 to 6, a simple dinner, and then the quiet hum of my computer until sleep. This order was my fortress, its walls built high to keep out the messy, unpredictable chaos of the world. And more importantly, the chaos of wanting. Then there was Elias. Elias was the architect of my quiet undoing. He worked 4 desks away, in the architecture division of our firm. He was everything my life was not: vibrant, expansive, effortlessly present. He didn't walk into a room. He occupied it, his presence a low, steady hum of energy that shifted the very atmosphere. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just the weight of his own ambition. His hair was a dark, unruly mess that he was always trying to tame with large, capable hands. Hands that I had watched sketch entire worlds on a flimsy tracing paper. He was a masterpiece I could only ever view from behind the velvet rope of my own inadequacy. My admiration was a secret, a private museum curated in the quietest corners of my mind. Each exhibit was a stolen detail. The way his brow furrowed when he was deep in concentration, creating a small, perfect valley between his eyebrows. The low, rumbling timbre of his voice as he spoke on the phone, a sound like distant thunder that vibrated through the floorboards and up my spine. The scent that trailed him, a clean, woody fragrance of sandalwood and something sharp like bergamot, a ghost that lingered long after he had passed my desk. The barrier between us was not just my own fear. It was a wall of assumption I had built brick by painful brick. Elias was friendly, warm, and kind to everyone. He would offer a genuine smile to the receptionist, hold the door for the interns, and sometimes he would even catch my eye across the office and offer a small, conspiratorial grin as if we were both in on some silent joke about the drudgery of corporate life. But this, I told myself, was simply his nature. He was a sun, radiating warmth indiscriminately. To believe any of it was specifically for me was a fantasy, a dangerous delusion. He was, in the carefully catalogued files of my mind, irrevocably straight. A man who spent his weekends hiking with friends, whose easy charm was surely reserved for a woman who was just as bright and effortlessly alive as he was. To hope for more was to invite wreckage into my meticulously ordered world. So I observed. I collected my quiet moments, polishing them like precious stones. I knew he took his coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of oat milk. I knew he tapped his pen against his teeth when he was stuck on a design problem. I knew the exact shade of blue of the worn flannel shirt he wore on casual Fridays. My feelings for him were a static display, beautiful and poignant, and, above all, safe. They existed behind glass, where they could be admired without the terrifying risk of being touched or broken. I had convinced myself that this was enough. This quiet, one-sided devotion was a sustainable form of ache. It was a low-grade fever I had learned to live with, a constant hum beneath the surface of my controlled existence. I could function, I could work, I could maintain the illusion of contentment. The fortress was secure. The museum was quiet. Nothing would ever have to change. I never expected that a single email, with its subject line in bold, capitalized red letters, would be the wrecking ball that would demolish it all. The email arrived at 4:52 p.m. on a Tuesday. Urgent. Project Valerian Timeline Acceleration. The cryptic name belonged to our biggest client, a tech giant whose contract kept the lights on and the coffee machine stocked. The deadline, once a comfortable month away, had been violently moved up to 2 weeks from now. Panic, a foreign and unwelcome guest, rippled through the office in a wave of sharp intakes of breath and frantic keyboard clicks. The project lead, a woman named Maria with a perpetually stressed expression, called an emergency meeting. Her words were a blur of corporate jargon and thinly veiled desperation. All hands on deck, synergize, paradigm shift. The only phrase that cut through the noise was overnight shifts. They needed volunteers to pull a series of all-nighters to get the foundational models and design assets completed. A wave of collective groans filled the conference room. But for me, a strange sense of calm settled in. The office at night was a familiar comfort. It was quiet. It was empty. It was an extension of my apartment, a place where I could work, uninterrupted, in my own little bubble of controlled solitude. I could put on my headphones, drink lukewarm coffee, and lose myself in the grid. It was perfect. When Maria asked for volunteers for the first, most crucial night shift, my hand went up without hesitation. It was a reflex born of years of being the reliable, unobtrusive employee. Maria gave me a grateful, weary smile. Thank you, Leo. We'll need at least one of the lead architects on this as well. My heart gave a small, traitorous flutter, a moth beating its wings against my ribs. I immediately crushed it. It would be Marcus, probably, or maybe Sarah. They were the senior leads. Then Maria's eyes scanned the room, and she said, Elias? I know you've done the bulk of the initial concepting. I need you on this. The world tilted on its axis. I watched, as if in slow motion, as Elias nodded. He didn't look annoyed or put upon. He just gave a simple, decisive nod. Of course. I'll stay. My fortress crumbled. The glass cases in my museum shattered. The carefully ordered lines of my life dissolved into a chaotic, terrifying scribble. An entire night. Alone. With him. The thought was a Molotov cocktail thrown into the quiet library of my mind. The air in the conference room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. This wasn't a disruption, it was a cataclysm. My quiet, predictable world was about to be flooded, and I had no idea how to swim. The office emptied out like a slow exhale. One by one, my colleagues packed their bags, offering tired words of encouragement and sympathetic glances. Good luck, you two, don't burn the place down. We'll bring donuts in the morning. Each comment felt like a small stone dropped into the deepening well of my anxiety. Soon, the familiar symphony of clicking keyboards and ringing phones faded, replaced by the low, monolithic hum of the building's climate control system. The vast, open-plan space, usually bustling with life, became a cavern of shadows and fluorescent light. And then there were two. Elias was at his desk, rolling up the sleeves of his blue shirt, revealing forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. The casual, domestic act felt shockingly intimate in the sterile environment. I was frozen at my own workstation, my screen glowing with the project files I was supposed to be organizing. My own hands felt clumsy and useless. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was a physical presence, a thick, charged atmosphere that made the air heavy in my lungs. I could hear the soft scratch of his pencil on paper, the quiet sigh he let out as he leaned back in his chair. Every sound was magnified, amplified by the emptiness around us. So, his voice cut through the quiet, and I jumped, my heart lurching into my throat. It sounded deeper, more resonant in the deserted office. The dream team, huh? He was looking at me, a small, tired smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was gentle, almost conspiratorial. I managed a weak nod, my throat too tight for words. I felt like an insect under a microscope, every nervous twitch, every flicker of my eyes exposed in the stark, unforgiving light. I turned my attention back to my screen, pretending to be absorbed in arranging layers in a Photoshop file, a task so simple I could do it in my sleep. But my focus was a sham. My entire awareness had been hijacked, recalibrated to orbit the man sitting 4 desks away. My senses were screaming. The scent of his cologne, which was usually a faint, pleasant grace note in the office air, was now the dominant fragrance. It had settled into the space, a warm, woody aroma that felt both comforting and deeply unsettling. I could hear the rustle of his clothes as he shifted, the soft thud of his boots as he propped his feet up on a spare chair. I became acutely aware of the temperature, the way the air conditioning would cycle on, raising goosebumps on my arms, making me wish for a sweater I had foolishly left at home. An hour passed in this state of hyper-aware silence. We worked, our screens casting a pale blue glow on our faces. But it wasn't a productive silence. It was the silence of two people intensely conscious of each other's existence. It was the silence before a storm. I felt a desperate need to say something, to break the tension, but my mind was a blank slate. What did people talk about? The weather? The project? Every potential topic seemed either painfully mundane or dangerously personal. Finally, around 10 o'clock, The growl of my own stomach broke the spell. It was a loud, embarrassing sound that echoed in the quiet. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. Elias chuckled. It wasn't a laugh, but a low, warm sound. Sounds like someone's hungry. I was just thinking about ordering food. Any preference? The simple, domestic question was another crack in the professional facade. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were two people, hungry and tired, trapped in a glass box overnight. Anything's fine, I managed to say, my voice sounding strained and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Tie it is," he said, already pulling up a menu on his phone. "My treat. Hazard pay." He looked at me again, and this time his smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. They were a warm, deep brown, the color of rich earth. I felt a dizzying lurch in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. I just nodded again, incapable of forming a coherent sentence. When the food arrived, we cleared a space on a large conference table, the small, white containers seeming like a miniature city in the vast expanse of polished wood. As he passed me a container of pad CEW, our fingers brushed. It was a fleeting, insignificant contact, lasting less than a second, but it sent a jolt of pure electricity through my system. It was like touching a live wire. His skin was warm, calloused, real. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, my heart hammering against my ribs. I risked a glance at him, but he seemed not to have noticed, already opening his own container. Did he feel that? Or was it just me? The question screamed in my mind. We ate in a more comfortable silence. The shared meal had somehow broken the initial tension, replacing it with a fragile, tentative truce. He asked me about my design process, and I found myself talking, explaining my obsession with grids and negative space. He listened intently, his head tilted, his gaze never leaving my face. It was unnerving and exhilarating in equal measure. To be seen by him, truly seen, was a terrifying privilege. Later, the air conditioning kicked into overdrive, and a deep, penetrating chill settled over the office. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. I saw Elias notice. Without a word, he stood up, walked to his desk, and came back with the worn flannel shirt he'd had draped over the back of his chair. It was the one I knew, the one the color of a twilight sky. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. "You look like you're freezing." "Oh no, I'm fine." I lied, my pride warring with the bone-deep chill. "Leo," he said, his voice soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. "Just take the shirt." My fingers trembled as I took it from him. The fabric was thick and soft, and it was warm from his body. It smelled of him, that sandalwood and bergamot, mixed with the faint, clean scent of laundry soap and something that was uniquely, indefinably Elias. I slipped it on. It was huge on me, the sleeves hanging down past my hands, the shoulders broad and encompassing. It felt like being wrapped in his presence, a tangible, physical embrace. The cold receded, replaced by a different kind of warmth that spread from my chest outwards. I mumbled a thank you, my face burning. I couldn't look at him. I just sat there, drowning in his shirt, breathing in his scent, feeling the last of my carefully constructed walls turn to dust. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the changing numbers on the digital clock in the corner of my screen. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2. The city outside our panoramic windows had gone to sleep, its grid of lights a silent, glittering carpet below us. Inside, the world had shrunk to this single, quiet room, to the space between my desk and his. The initial awkwardness had melted away with exhaustion, replaced by a strange, shared intimacy. We were two castaways on a desert island of laminate desks and ergonomic chairs. We worked in tandem, passing files back and forth, our movements falling into an easy rhythm. The project, which had been the source of my dread, became a bridge between us. He would ask my opinion on a structural rendering, and I would ask for his input on a color palette. We were building something together, not just for the client, but in the space between us. A fragile structure made of quiet collaboration and shared cups of bitter coffee. Around 2:30, the caffeine began to fail us. My eyelids felt heavy as lead weights, and the lines on my screen started to blur together. I saw Elias leaning back in his chair, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. He let out a long, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire project. "I think my brain is starting to melt," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. I managed a small smile. Mine turned to soup about an hour ago. He chuckled, a low, tired sound. He dropped his hands and looked at me, his gaze unfocused for a moment before it sharpened. It's the pressure, he said, almost to himself. This client, they don't just want a building. They want a landmark. A statement. He fell silent, staring out the window at the dark cityscape. I thought that was the end of it, a simple complaint about work stress. But then he spoke again, his voice softer, more vulnerable than I had ever heard it. My dad's an architect, he said, not looking at me. A pretty famous one. He designed the new wing of the city art museum. I knew the building. It was a breathtaking structure of glass and sweeping steel, a landmark. I had no idea it was his father's work. He thinks this commercial stuff is beneath me, Elias continued, a bitter edge to his tone. He thinks I'm squandering whatever potential he thinks I have. Every project feels like a test, like I have to prove to him, and maybe to myself, that I'm not just riding on his name. He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I never expected to see in the confident, self-assured Elias I had constructed in my mind. I saw a crack in the facade. I saw insecurity. I saw the shadow of a father's expectations, a weight I understood all too well in my own way. In that moment, he stopped being a museum piece. He was no longer a collection of admirable traits I could observe from a safe distance. He was real. He was a person with his own fears and his own ghosts, just like me. The realization was a quiet earthquake, shifting the very ground beneath my feet. My admiration, once a safe, static thing, began to transform into something deeper, more complex, and infinitely more dangerous. It was blooming into empathy, into a connection that felt terrifyingly real. I think your work is incredible, I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The way you use light and space, it's not just functional. It has feeling. It's human. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. For a long, breathless moment, the only sound was the hum of the servers. I thought I had overstepped, that I had said too much, laid my cards too bare on the table. My face grew hot, and I wanted to snatch the words back out of the air. But then, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was different from his usual friendly smiles. This one was softer, more fragile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated gratitude. Thank you, Leo, he said, his voice barely a whisper. No one's ever said that about my work before. The connection between us, which had been a faint, tentative thread, suddenly pulled taut. The air crackled with it. The fortress was gone. The museum was in ruins. I was standing in the open, completely undefended, and all I could think was that I never wanted to build the walls back up again. The creative wall we hit was absolute. It was 3 a.m, the witching hour, and the designs on our screens had devolved into nonsensical shapes. The coffee had turned on us, making us jittery and unfocused instead of alert. It was Elias who finally surrendered. Okay, I'm done, he declared, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape that echoed in the silence. We need a break before our brains leak out of our ears. Balcony. 5 minutes. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my body moving on autopilot as I followed him toward the glass doors at the far end of the office. The balcony was a small, concrete slab, an architectural afterthought designed for smokers, but tonight it felt like a sanctuary. The moment the door slid open, the cold night air rushed in, a shocking, clean blast that cut through the stale, recycled atmosphere of the office. It smelled of damp pavement and the distant, metallic tang of the city. The world was asleep. Below us, the streets were empty arteries, the traffic lights blinking yellow for no one. The city's usual roar had been reduced to a faint, whispery hum. It felt like we were the only 2 people awake in the entire world, suspended in a bubble of cold air and quiet contemplation. Elias leaned against the metal railing, his broad back to me, and looked out over the sleeping metropolis. The wind toyed with the ends of his dark hair. He was wearing just his thin button-down shirt, and I could see him shiver slightly as a gust of wind swept across the balcony. His flannel, felt heavy and warm around my shoulders. An impulse, reckless and undeniable, took hold of me. I moved to stand beside him at the railing, my steps feeling unnaturally loud on the concrete. I positioned myself so that my body partially blocked the wind from hitting him. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it felt monumental. A silent offering. He turned his head, his profile silhouetted against the faint glow of the city lights. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. The space between us was no longer measured in feet or inches. It was measured in heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. It was a space filled with everything we hadn't said all night, with the shared exhaustion, the unexpected confession, the weight of his shirt on my shoulders. I could see the dark stubble on his jaw, the faint trace of fatigue under his eyes. His eyes, which were usually so full of light and easy humor, were dark and deep, reflecting the pinpricks of light from the city below. He didn't turn away. He just kept looking at me, and his gaze was an unspoken question. It was a question that bypassed words and logic and went straight to the terrified, hopeful core of me. It asked, "Are you seeing this too? Are you feeling this?" My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure he could hear it. My carefully ordered world had been replaced by this single, terrifying, exhilarating moment. There were no grids here, no straight lines. Just the chaotic, beautiful mess of him, of us. He shifted his weight, turning his body slightly to face me more fully. The distance between us shrank to nothing. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold night air. I could smell the coffee on his breath. His gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second, and then back to my eyes. It was all the permission he needed. It was all the permission I had unknowingly been waiting to give for a year. Slowly, tentatively, he leaned in. My mind went blank. The internal monologue that had been my constant companion, the anxious narrator of my life, fell completely silent. There was only the feeling of his approach, the magnetic pull between us. His hand came up, not to touch my face, but to gently grip the railing beside my head, caging me in. It was a gesture of both possession and uncertainty. And then his lips met mine. The first touch was soft, questioning. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of exploration. It was a question asked in a language I had never spoken but had always understood. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft. It tasted of coffee and exhaustion and something that was just him. My entire world, my entire existence, contracted to this single point of contact. The city vanished. The office disappeared. There was only the press of his mouth against mine, the rough texture of his stubble against my skin, the scent of him filling my senses. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and my lips parted slightly. It was an invitation. He answered it by deepening the kiss, his other hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. The tentativeness was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant certainty. This was not a mistake. This was not a product of fatigue. This was real. This was happening. The carefully constructed dam inside me broke. A year of silent, secret yearning, of hopeless admiration, of carefully suppressed desire came flooding out. I kissed him back with a desperate intensity that shocked me, my hands coming up to grip his shirt. The world tilted, spun, and then reformed itself around this new, unbelievable center of gravity. My life, the one of straight lines and quiet spaces, was over. And in its place was this beautiful, terrifying, magnificent chaos. The sound of the balcony door sliding open shattered the moment. We sprang apart as if electrocuted, two guilty teenagers caught in the act. It was the night security guard on his rounds, a portly man named George who peered at us with sleepy, uninterested eyes. "Everything all right out here, fellas?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Just getting some air," Elias said, his voice miraculously steady, though I could see the rapid pulse beating in his throat. "Long night." George just grunted, shone his flashlight around the empty balcony, and then disappeared back inside, the door sliding shut with a soft whoosh. The spell was broken. The bubble had popped. We were left standing in the cold, the 3 feet between us now feeling like an impassable chasm. The kiss, so real and solid moments before, now felt like a dream, a hallucination brought on by caffeine and sleep deprivation. Neither of us spoke. We couldn't look at each other. Wordlessly, we turned and went back inside, the artificial warmth of the office feeling suffocating. We returned to our respective desks. The project files glowed on our screens, a stark reminder of the world that existed before the balcony. We worked for another 2 hours, the silence between us now a thick, heavy blanket of awkwardness and unspoken questions. Every keystroke, every click of a mouse, felt deafening. The flannel shirt I was still wearing felt like it was burning my skin. As the first gray, watery light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of lilac and steel, the first of our colleagues arrived. The sound of the elevator dinging was a death knell. Our strange, nocturnal world was being invaded by the harsh reality of the day. We packed up our things in a clumsy, hurried silence, avoiding each other's eyes. "See you later," I mumbled as I fled toward the elevator, not daring to look back. "Leo," he called after me, but the elevator doors were already closing, cutting him off, sealing me in my metal box of shame and confusion. The walk home was a blur. The city was waking up, but I felt like I was moving through a dream. When I got to my apartment, my sanctuary of order, it felt alien. The straight lines seemed to mock me. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was accusing. I collapsed onto my bed without taking off my clothes, his clothes, and stared at the ceiling, my mind a churning vortex of anxiety. It was a mistake. That had to be it. A terrible, career-ending, friendship-destroying mistake. He was tired. He was stressed. He was vulnerable after talking about his father. I was just there. A convenient, sympathetic ear. He probably regretted it the second it was over. The kiss meant nothing to him. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. For me, it had been a cataclysm, a rewriting of my entire existence. For him, it was probably just a weird, late-night thing he already wanted to forget. I had ruined everything. Our easy, distant camaraderie was gone forever. Now, there would only be this excruciating awkwardness. He would avoid me. I would have to see him every single day, a constant, painful reminder of my foolishness, of the moment I let myself believe the fantasy could be real. The anxiety was a physical thing, a cold, heavy knot in my stomach. I replayed the kiss over and over, dissecting it, analyzing it, searching for the flaw, the proof that I had imagined the tenderness, the certainty. But I couldn't find it. It had felt real. And that, somehow, made the impending rejection even more painful. I finally fell into a fitful, dreamless sleep, only to wake a few hours later with a pounding headache and the bitter taste of dread in my mouth. I had to go back to work. I had to face him. The thought of it made me want to crawl under my covers and never come out. But I couldn't. I showered, dressed in my most nondescript, invisible clothes, and walked back to the office like a man heading to his own execution. The office was buzzing with the energy of a normal workday, a stark contrast to the quiet tomb it had been the night before. I slipped into my chair, keeping my head down, my eyes fixed on my screen. I could feel him, though. I could feel his presence 4 desks away like a magnetic pull. I risked a single, fleeting glance in his direction. He was at his desk, talking on the phone, his expression all business. He looked focused, professional, completely normal. He looked as if nothing had happened. My heart sank. That was it. That was my confirmation. He was pretending it never happened. He had already compartmentalized it, filed it away as a nocturnal anomaly. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't acknowledging me. The distance between us, which had vanished for a few beautiful moments on that balcony, had returned, wider and more desolate than ever before. The rest of the day was a special kind of torture, a slow-motion agony of proximity and distance. Every time someone walked past my desk, I flinched, thinking it was him. Every time I heard his voice, a fresh wave of shame washed over me. By 5 o'clock, I felt hollowed out, an empty shell of anxiety. I just wanted to escape, to run back to my apartment and rebuild my walls, thicker and higher than ever before. I packed my bag with frantic, clumsy movements, my only thought to get out before he could. I was almost at the elevators, almost safe, when I heard it. His voice, low and steady, cutting through the ambient chatter of the office. "Leo," I froze, my hand hovering over the call button. "Can we talk?" My stomach dropped. This was it. The talk. The, "I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression" speech. The "let's just forget this happened and be professionals" conversation. I turned around slowly, my body feeling like it was made of lead. He was standing there, his jacket slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable but intense. I could only manage a single, pathetic nod. He led the way, not to a busy coffee shop or a public park, but back into the large, empty conference room where our ordeal had begun less than 24 hours earlier. The air was still and cool. He shut the door behind us, the soft click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the silence. He didn't sit down. He just stood by the door, running a hand through his already messy hair, a gesture I now recognized as a sign of nervousness. For the first time, I noticed that he looked just as wrecked as I felt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual easy confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, tense vulnerability. "Look," he started, his voice a little rough. He cleared his throat. "About last night." I braced myself, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "You don't have to," I interrupted, the words rushing out in a desperate torrent. "I get it. We were tired, it was late, it was a mistake. We can just forget it, okay? I'm fine. We can just be colleagues." He stared at me, his brown eyes wide with something that didn't look like relief. It looked like hurt. "A mistake," he repeated, his voice quiet. "Is that what you think it was?" I didn't know what to say. I just stared back at him, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm. He took a step closer, closing some of the terrifying distance between us. "Leo, I didn't volunteer for that shift because I'm a workaholic. I volunteered because I saw your hand go up." The world stopped spinning. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. I must have misheard him. That couldn't be what he said. "What?" I breathed. "I saw you volunteer," he repeated, his gaze unwavering, "and I saw my chance. I've been trying to find a way to talk to you, really talk to you, for months. But you're so contained, so quiet. I was terrified of crossing a line, of making you uncomfortable at work. I didn't know how to get past the 4 desks between us." He took another step. He was so close now I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "All those times I smiled at you," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "That wasn't just me being friendly. I was hoping you'd smile back in a way that told me it was okay. The night shift, it felt like the only way to get you alone, away from all this." He gestured vaguely at the office beyond the glass walls. "To see if the thing I thought I was feeling was real. My carefully constructed narrative, the one where I was an invisible admirer and he was an unattainable, straight ideal, was being systematically dismantled, brick by painful brick. But I thought I just assumed." "You assumed I was straight," he finished for me, a sad, knowing smile touching his lips. "Everyone does. To be honest, for a long time, I did too. Or maybe it was just easier to. I haven't felt like this about anyone before, Leo. And it's terrifying. But the only thing more terrifying than feeling it was the thought of you thinking last night was a mistake." The knot of anxiety in my stomach didn't just loosen. It dissolved completely, replaced by a dizzying, soaring wave of pure, unadulterated relief. It was so overwhelming I felt lightheaded. The floodgates holding back a year of silent hope and fear finally burst. "A mistake," I whispered, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "Elias, I have spent the last year treating you like a piece of art in a museum. Something I could look at but never, ever touch. I have memorized the way you take your coffee. I know the sound of your voice so well I could pick it out of 1,000. Last night wasn't a mistake. It was the most real thing that has ever happened to me." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and vulnerable. I had laid myself bare, showing him the secret, obsessive corners of my heart. I watched as his expression softened, the tension draining from his shoulders, the anxiety in his eyes replaced by a look of profound, heart-stopping tenderness. He closed the remaining distance between us in a single step. His hands came up to cup my face, his palms warm and rough against my skin. "A museum?" he murmured, his thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. "God, Leo, you had no idea, did you? I was the one watching you. Watching you create these incredible things, so focused, so in your own world. I just wanted to find a way in." And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first one on the balcony. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. This was a kiss of homecoming. It was deep and sure and full of all the words we had been too scared to say. It was relief and recognition and the breathtaking promise of a beginning. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, melting into him. The last of my walls came crashing down, not with a violent roar, but with a quiet, peaceful sigh of surrender. We walked home from the office together that evening, our hands brushing against each other's with every step. The city was alive with the evening rush, but it all felt like background noise. My world had contracted to the space between us. As we reached a less crowded street, Elias's fingers tentatively intertwined with mine. The feeling of his hand, large and warm and solid, holding mine was so new, so overwhelmingly right, that it brought tears to my eyes. This simple act of connection was something I had never allowed myself to even dream of. My apartment, which had felt so cold and alien that morning, now felt like a haven. We didn't talk much at first. We just existed in the same space, the quiet between us now comfortable and full of unspoken understanding. He explored my living room, running his fingers over the spines of my precisely stacked books, examining the minimalist prints on my walls. "It's so you," he said with a soft smile. "Calm. Ordered." "It was my fortress," I admitted, my voice quiet. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. "You don't need it anymore." The days that followed were a gentle unfolding. We learned each other's rhythms. He would bring me coffee in the mornings at work, and he always remembered the one sugar and splash of oat milk. I started leaving him little vector illustrations on our shared server, a stylized version of a building he was working on, a small cartoon version of him tapping his pen against his teeth. They were our new secret language. We started carving out our own world, away from the office. Lunches in a small, quiet park a few blocks away. Late-night walks through the sleeping city that had been the backdrop to our beginning. We discovered the small, domestic details of each other's lives. I learned that he was a terrible cook, but made up for it by being meticulously good at washing dishes. He learned that I couldn't sleep without the faint sound of a fan, even in winter. These tiny, mundane discoveries felt more intimate than any grand confession. One evening, a few weeks later, we were at his apartment. It was the opposite of mine, warm, cluttered in a cozy way, filled with overflowing bookshelves, architectural models, and plants that he somehow kept alive. He was sketching at his large drafting table, and I was on his sofa, reading, wrapped in a comfortable silence. He suddenly chuckled to himself. "What is it?" I asked. "I was just thinking," he said, turning in his chair to look at me, a teasing glint in his eye. "Maria was asking for volunteers for another late-night push on the Valerian project next week." I smiled, a real, easy smile that reached my eyes. "Oh, really? I don't know. I think I'm pretty busy." He got up and walked over to the sofa, looming over me with a playful grin. "Are you sure? I hear it's a great opportunity for some focused, one-on-one collaboration." He leaned down, bracing his hands on either side of my head, and kissed me softly. "Maybe we should volunteer," he murmured against my lips. "For the good of the company, of course." I laughed, a sound that still felt new and wonderful coming from my own chest. It was our first inside joke, the foundation myth of us. The night that had started as my worst nightmare had become the single greatest thing that had ever happened to me. Later, lying in his bed, with his arm draped protectively over my chest, and his steady breathing a comforting rhythm in the dark, I thought about the walls I had spent so long building. I had designed my life like one of my projects, clean, controlled, with plenty of negative space to keep everything from feeling too crowded. I thought that was safety. I thought that was peace. I had mistaken loneliness for solitude. Elias hadn't just broken down my walls. He had shown me that the point wasn't to keep the chaos out. The point was to find the one person worth letting in, the one person who could make the chaos feel like home. The straight lines of my life had been beautifully, irrevocably redrawn into a new, complex, and magnificent design, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never, ever want to go back.